Welcome to a tale of royal drama that shatters every fairy tale illusion. Imagine a young princess trapped in a whirlwind of family betrayals, public scandal, and an arranged marriage destined to fail. This is the riveting story of Caroline of Brunswick, the outspoken rebel who faced off against a kingdom's oldest traditions, turning her private heartbreak into a public sensation. Stay tuned, because her journey will change the way you see royalty forever. Caroline of Brunswick's journey was one of clashing desires and public dramas that echoed through the gilded corridors of Europe's grand palaces. She was born on May 17, 1768, in the Duchy of Brunswick. In a grand German palace, the seat of Duke Charles William Ferdinand and his wife, Princess Augusta of Great Britain. At first glance, it might seem the perfect environment for a young princess to learn grace, diplomacy, and all the refined skills needed for a future on the world stage. But Caroline's home was anything but serene. Her mother and father not only disliked each other, they despised each other. And her father, never one to bother hiding his appetites, brazenly flaunted his chief mistress around court. The atmosphere was so toxic that Caroline remembered feeling like a shuttlecock, batted back and forth between two people who could not stand to see her express affection for the other. In this environment, it hardly mattered that she bore royal blood or that her lineage traced back to Britain's own family tree. She was just a child trying to survive a never-ending domestic Cold War. Though she tried to appease both parents, any gesture toward one inevitably angered the other, leaving her anxious, confused, and unsteady about where she truly belonged. Yet it wasn't all doom and gloom. Caroline possessed gifts that would later become her armor in the tense world of royal politics: an irrepressible sense of humor, a naturally vibrant personality, and a growing beauty that took everyone by surprise. While some youngsters grapple with awkward phases, Caroline seemed to stride effortlessly toward her teenage years in an explosion of radiance. She had light, curly hair that shimmered in the right light, a robust figure that was considered extremely fashionable, and an easy confidence that made her irresistibly charming. One courtier described her as most amiable, lively, playful, witty, and handsome. Words that could have been lifted straight out of a romantic novel. For a time, these attributes were her saving grace. They helped her cut through the oppressive tension at home and forge her own sense of self. Unfortunately, they also drew the attention of would-be suitors long before she was emotionally ready for marriage. By the time Caroline turned 13, her parents were already fielding proposals from English princes and Prussian nobility alike, eager to secure beneficial alliances. In many aristocratic families of the era, the question of a child's personal readiness was secondary at best. What mattered was forging strategic connections and ensuring that the family line expanded in the most politically advantageous manner possible. Even Caroline's strict upbringing, intended perhaps to curb her impulsive streak, couldn't shield her from the swirl of flirtations and negotiations that came with being a prize in the marriage market. Rumors whispered that she had a string of potential grooms who vanished just as suddenly as they arrived. Some speculated that her family's deep dysfunction tarnished every arrangement. Others guessed that the would-be matches discovered something scandalous about the Brunswick court. Still others murmured that Caroline herself might have been, if not rebellious, then at least so spirited that potential in-laws hesitated to bring her under their roofs. This was a time when girls were supposed to appear docile and refined, and Caroline, though perfectly charming, rarely pretended to be meek. Set against this whirlwind, Caroline looked forward as best she could. She found refuge in moments of fun, flirting in her father's halls, though that father was often accompanied by his mistress, chatting with visitors and reading just enough to feed her curiosity about the world beyond Brunswick. Of course, no one dreamed that one day she would become a global scandal, an embattled queen consort in a land far less forgiving than her parents' court. Then again, for all the instability at home, she was at least free to speak her mind, a freedom that would clash violently with the stifling etiquette of the British Crown. Even her minimal education, which some would later mock, gave her a spark of individuality. She might not have devoured the classics or studied statecraft in detail, but she knew how to hold a conversation, make people laugh, and gather a circle of admirers without half trying. Fate stepped in when the matter of her marriage to George, Prince of Wales, surfaced. In Britain, the monarchy faced enormous debts, courtesy of George's extravagant lifestyle and the endless expenses that came with wars and colonial entanglements. George was the heir to the throne, and his father, King George III, was keen to see his profligate son settle down, produce legitimate heirs, and perhaps chip away at that mountain of debt. The talk among diplomats was that Caroline, George's cousin, was a suitable match. Tying the knot would strengthen connections between British and German branches of royalty, hopefully dull George's more outlandish spending, and create a neat little union that looked good on paper. Had they met in more ordinary circumstances, perhaps Caroline and George might have recognized their complete incompatibility. But arranged marriages don't run on personal preference. They run on political expedience. And so the wheels were set in motion. Caroline was 26 when she arrived in England in April 1795, older than many princesses who were married off at the time, but still naive about the complexities of British court life. She'd heard rumors, of course. The Prince of Wales, known to be charming yet notoriously fickle, had a secret, though by then not so secret marriage, to a Catholic widow named Maria Fitzherbert. He was trapped by the Royal Marriages Act, which declared any union without the king's consent null and void, particularly a union with a Catholic. The prince had also accumulated astronomical debts. For Caroline's father and mother, sending their daughter to this uncertain match might have seemed risky, but it was also an opportunity to enhance their own status. Perhaps they believed her beauty and bright personality would win the prince over, or maybe they simply wanted to offload the responsibility of her future. When Caroline first laid eyes on George, the encounter fell spectacularly flat. According to one infamous report, the prince recoiled at the sight of her. He found her hygiene lacking, an accusation often repeated by those loyal to George, though likely exaggerated. If Caroline's father had flaunted a mistress at home, George was ready to raise that game by openly scorning his new wife. On their wedding day, April 8, 1795, George was so drunk that some guests whispered he could barely walk straight. It was a forced spectacle. The entire court teemed with an undercurrent of discomfort. The brand new princess, unsure of herself in this cold environment. The groom, resentful and intoxicated. The aristocrats sharing worried glances as the fiasco played out. In the privacy of the royal bedchamber, the pair consummated their marriage briefly, something that seemed almost like a legal requirement, a token gesture necessary to produce an heir. And produce an heir they did, with Princess Charlotte arriving on January 7, 1796. For a fleeting moment, there was hope that Charlotte's birth might ease the tension between Caroline and George. But if anything, it emboldened George to demand a permanent separation, having done his dynastic duty by fathering a child. He locked Caroline out of his social circles and finances, reducing her allowance to a pittance. In response, Caroline didn't recoil or beg. Instead, she took a separate household at Blackheath, outside London, and set about creating an atmosphere of revelry and lively companionship that served as her emotional sanctuary. Freed, at least partially, from the strictures of court life, she reveled in witty banter, merriment, and a steady flow of friends who enjoyed her sense of fun. Yes, she might have been naive regarding the dangers of rumors that would swirl around a woman living apart from her husband, hosting men and women from all walks of life. But after the bitterness of her early life and the near farcical wedding to George, she likely welcomed any sense of normalcy and warmth. But Blackheath was no typical suburban refuge. Word spread quickly that Caroline's parties were both extravagant and improper. Staff, neighbors, and visitors whispered that she indulged in flirtations or lacked decorum. The most damaging rumor centered on a boy named William Austin, whom Caroline took into her household. People began to suspect that William was Caroline's illegitimate son. If that accusation stuck, it would brand her an adulteress, and under British law, that had dire ramifications for her status. King George III launched a secretive inquiry in 1806, dubbed the Delicate Investigation, to determine if Caroline had indeed birthed a child out of wedlock. Servants were interrogated, diaries were scrutinized, every snippet of gossip became potential evidence. In the end, the findings were inconclusive. She wasn't declared innocent so much as not proven guilty, leaving her in a cloud of suspicion that George happily fanned at every opportunity. Despite, or perhaps because of, her precarious position, Caroline found allies among Whig politicians who recognized that siding with her was a convenient way to criticize the Prince of Wales. Ordinary people, too, rallied behind her. The public, burdened by taxes and outraged by the prince's blatant hypocrisy, he indulged in multiple affairs yet was persecuting his own wife for alleged improprieties, saw Caroline as a sort of folk hero. She was the defiant underdog in a struggle against a pampered, out-of-touch prince. Pamphlets and newspapers championed her cause, portraying her in idealized terms and depicting George as a wastrel who deserved comeuppance. Personal tragedy soon intertwined with the political drama. Caroline's relationship with her daughter, Princess Charlotte, became a flashpoint. George, alarmed that Charlotte might be contaminated by Caroline, limited their contact. The heartbreak of being forcibly separated from her own child must have been excruciating. Charlotte, growing into a lively and popular young woman, empathized with her mother's plight, but her father's dominance made it impossible for them to see each other often. Caroline continued her social life at Blackheath, collecting admirers, but the wound left by the loss of her daughter's daily companionship ran deep. Her partying and breezy banter may have been, at least in part, a defense mechanism to cope with the profound loneliness she felt. By 1814, Caroline decided she'd had enough of England's cold stares and constant suspicion. She embarked on a continental tour, hoping to leave behind the hostility and perhaps recapture some sense of autonomy. In Italy, she dove headlong into a more liberated lifestyle. Gone were the severe English dresses. In their place, she wore gowns considered scandalously revealing by British standards. At lavish events, she danced with a carefree exuberance that both shocked and delighted onlookers. She hired an Italian servant named Bartolomeo Pergami, who swiftly became a central figure in her entourage. Their relationship, perhaps purely emotional, perhaps physical, ignited a frenzy of speculation. The British press seized on every mention of them bathing together, traveling together, hosting extravagant feasts together. In the eyes of the English establishment, this was proof enough of adultery, though direct evidence remained elusive. Meanwhile, events in London took a momentous turn. King George III's health deteriorated, and in 1820, upon his death, the Prince of Wales became King George IV. The new king was determined to rid himself of Caroline once and for all. The big question was whether she would be recognized as queen consort. Public sentiment still burned brightly in her favor, and the last thing George wanted was a triumphant Caroline overshadowing his coronation. Caroline, for her part, felt vindicated. She had endured years of slander, humiliation, and exile. Now was her chance to claim her rightful place as queen, at least nominally, and enjoy the public's goodwill. It was at this juncture that the monarchy unleashed one of the most infamous legal sagas of the Regency era, the Pains and Penalties Bill of 1820, designed specifically to divest Caroline of her title and dissolve the marriage. The bill accused her of adultery with pergami, brandishing testimonies from hired spies and resentful servants who claimed to have witnessed shocking indiscretions. The House of Lords held a trial that became the talk of the kingdom. Newspapers published scandalous excerpts from witness accounts. Cartoonists lampooned both Caroline and George, and the city's streets rumbled with the excitement of a populace that viewed the proceedings as a grotesque spectacle. Caroline, armed with a legal dream team led by Henry Brougham, refused to shrink away. She attended the sessions, openly mocking the prosecution's flimsy evidence, and carried herself with a mix of defiance and theatrical flair that endeared her even further to onlookers. The public outcry against George's hypocrisy was deafening. True, Caroline's behavior in Europe may have been bold and quite possibly unwise, but George's own record of serial mistresses, secret marriages, and scandalous debts overshadowed any moral high ground he might have claimed. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, brandishing signs and chanting slogans in support of Caroline. The government quickly realized that actually passing the bill risked inciting riots or worse. After the Lords passed it by a perilously slim margin, the measure stalled. Ministers abandoned it in November 1820, effectively handing Caroline a moral victory. She kept her title as queen in name, though George resolutely barred her from any real participation in court life. But tragedy and heartbreak were never far from Caroline's door. Years earlier, in 1817, her beloved daughter Charlotte had died in childbirth at the age of 21. The news reached Caroline late, allegedly because George withheld it from her. This was a blow from which she never truly recovered. Charlotte had been her great ally, the living proof that despite all the toxicity between Caroline and George, something meaningful had come of their union. The heartbreak of losing her only child, compounded by the isolation forced upon her, deepened her sense of injustice. Still, the outpouring of public sympathy, already strong in the wake of Charlotte's death, only increased Caroline's aura as a tragic heroine locked in a battle with a callous monarchy. By 1821, George was preparing for his coronation. It would be a splendid affair, full of pageantry and pomp that could obscure the monarchy's many recent embarrassments. Caroline was determined not to be sidelined. She arrived at Westminster Abbey on July 19th, demanding entrance as queen consort. Yet every door she tried was barred by guards, effectively shutting her out in a humiliating pantomime that the public watched in mounting fury. This singular incident became a defining image. Caroline, the rightful if estranged queen, locked outside while her husband basked in the adulation of courtiers. Shortly after this fiasco, her health took a dramatic turn for the worse. Whispers of poisoning spread among her allies, though modern historians think a bowel obstruction or related ailment was more likely. Regardless of the cause, she died on August 7, 1821, At the age of 53 in Brandenburg House, a modest home compared to the palaces where she'd been meant to reign. In death, Caroline remained defiant. She requested that she be buried in Brunswick, not in the land that had so viciously spurned her. Her coffin bore a stark inscription, Caroline, the injured Queen of England. The funeral procession was anything but peaceful. Crowds turned out in force, determined to honor her memory, while soldiers tried to control the masses. Riots broke out when authorities attempted to divert her coffin away from central London. It was as if the people, still seething over her mistreatment, insisted on a public display of mourning that would send a final rebuke to the king. To those who adored her, Caroline's last journey was the culminating testament to her resilience and the monarchy's profound failure to treat her with fairness. Now, centuries later, as we unravel Caroline's story, we find a figure whose blend of vivacity, defiance, and vulnerability is deeply human. She challenges the myth that royals are automatically dignified or gracious. She shows us that behind the pomp and ceremony can lie heartbreak, betrayal, and personal torment. And yet she also demonstrates how someone pushed to the margins can fight back using the era's most potent weapon, public opinion. She was savvy enough, perhaps instinctively rather than strategically, to cultivate an image that resonated with ordinary people who had grown disenchanted with a monarchy that seemed to place itself above any moral reckoning. Thus ends the story of Caroline of Brunswick, though in truth, it never really ends. Her influence lingers in every conversation about the power of the monarchy, about the role of the press, about how women navigate oppressive traditions to carve out autonomy, and about how public opinion can be harnessed to challenge entrenched authority. Even centuries later, she beckons us with her irreverent laugh, her flamboyant parties, and her uncompromising quest for dignity. She demands that we look beyond the pomp and see the person, a woman born into dysfunction, molded by heartbreak, yet unwilling to let her spirit be caged by the gilded bars of royalty. And in that fierce, unbreakable resolve, she stands apart, forever the injured queen who refused to bow. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the tumultuous life of Caroline of Brunswick. If her daring spirit, shocking scandals, and unbreakable resilience intrigued you, be sure to like and subscribe for even more fascinating stories from history's most dramatic royals. Until next time, keep questioning the legends and never stop exploring the human side of our most iconic figures.